Daniel Harrington had built an empire from scratch. The restaurant chain that bore his family name was one of the most successful in the country, with polished ads, glossy reviews, and branches in almost every major city. On paper, it all looked perfect. But Daniel wasn't satisfied with numbers on a spreadsheet. He wanted to know the truth, the real heart of his business. And lately, reports from one particular branch troubled him: declining profits, high employee turnover, and whispered complaints that something was off. That was why, on a chilly Tuesday evening, Daniel found himself in jeans and a plain gray t-shirt, his hair slightly tousled. His usual luxury watch swapped for a cheap one he picked up at a street vendor. He had left behind the tailored suits and chauffeured cars. Tonight, he wasn't the CEO. He was just another man looking for part-time work. He walked into the Harrington's bistro located on the corner of Maple and 12th, a branch that once had glowing reviews, but now was half empty during peak hours. Inside, the smell of freshly baked bread lingered, but the atmosphere was tired. The lights flickered faintly, a couple of tables wobbled when guests leaned on them, and the staff moved with a kind of wary resignation. Dishwasher. The manager, a sharp-eyed man named Kyle, asked when Daniel pretended to be a walk-in looking for work. "Yes, sir," Daniel said, keeping his voice low, humble. Kyle barely looked at him before shoving an apron into his hands. "Back there. Don't mess up." And just like that, the CEO of Harrington's was standing in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, scrubbing plates and stacking pans with the rest of the dish crew. From his vantage point, Daniel observed everything. The cooks were overworked but efficient. The servers, however, seemed burdened, juggling too many tasks, while trying to keep smiles plastered on their faces. Among them was one young woman who immediately stood out. She couldn't have been older than her mid-20s, yet there was a maturity in her eyes, the kind you only carried if life had forced you to grow up too fast. Her uniform was neatly pressed, though the fabric was frayed at the edges. Her shoes had been polished, but Daniel noticed the soles were worn thin. She wasn't the loudest, nor the fastest. But there was a gentleness in the way she spoke to customers, a patience in the way she leaned down to listen when an elderly man asked her to repeat the soup options. "Grace," one of the other waitresses called, rolling her eyes. "You're too nice to these people. No wonder your tables take forever." Grace only smiled faintly, as though she had heard the comment 1,000 times before. "It's fine," she said softly. "They deserve kindness." Her words struck Daniel. In a place where stress seemed to weigh down everyone, she radiated quiet dignity. As the evening wore on, Daniel kept sneaking glances at her. He noticed how she skipped her own meal break, insisting another waitress eat first. He noticed how she slipped a free coffee refill to a tired nurse in scrubs, whispering, "Don't worry about it. It's on me." He noticed, most of all, the exhaustion in her eyes whenever she thought no one was watching. At one point, she came into the kitchen with a tray of dirty dishes, setting them down carefully. Their eyes met briefly, and she gave him a polite nod, the kind you give to a stranger you pass in a hallway. Daniel felt a strange tug in his chest. He was supposed to be observing employees for efficiency, for honesty, for work ethic. But here he was, caught off guard by the quiet resilience of one waitress named Grace. He didn't know her story yet. He didn't know the weight she carried after hours, or the secret she hid at the end of every shift. All he knew was this: there was something different about her. Something that made him want to understand more. As the clock neared closing time, Daniel dried his hands on a rag, his mind already churning. He had come undercover to catch mistakes, maybe even dishonesty. Instead, he found himself wondering about the young woman with the tired eyes and the patient smile. And deep down, though he didn't realize it yet, Grace was about to change his life in a way spreadsheets and profits never could. The evening crowd trickled out slowly, and by 10 p.m., Harrington's bistro was quiet again. Chairs were turned upside down on tables, the floors mopped, and the kitchen finally began to cool from the heat of the ovens. Daniel kept his head down, scrubbing the last stack of pans, but his eyes never stopped observing. He had always believed that the truth of a business revealed itself after hours, when the public was gone, and employees were left to themselves. Grace was still there, moving quietly as she wiped tables and refilled the condiment caddies. Most of the other servers had clocked out. their laughter echoing faintly as they left together. But Grace lingered, her movements deliberate, unhurried, as though she dreaded the moment she'd finally walk out the door. Daniel noticed her glancing at the kitchen every so often, her eyes flicking to the bread counter, where baskets of unsold rolls sat, wrapped in cloth to keep them warm. Most restaurants tossed leftovers, and Harrington's was no exception. It was a rule Daniel himself had signed off on years ago, a decision based on liability and food safety. But what happened next made him freeze. Grace waited until Kyle, the manager, disappeared into his office. Then she walked slowly to the bread counter, hesitating for a long moment. With hands that trembled just slightly, she slipped 2 rolls into a napkin, then carefully tucked them into her purse, pressing the flap shut as if sealing away a guilty secret. Daniel's chest tightened. At first, his instinct was sharp, stealing. He had come undercover precisely to catch behavior like this. Countless times he'd seen employees pocket money from the register, smuggle out bottles of wine, or take advantage of the system. Was Grace just another one of them? But something about the way she did it made him pause. This wasn't the cocky boldness of someone sneaking luxuries for themselves. This was cautious, nervous, almost desperate. Her eyes darted toward the door every few seconds. Her lips pressed tightly together as though she feared being caught. She wasn't thinking of indulgence. She was thinking of survival. Grace pulled her thin sweater tighter around her shoulders, checked that Kyle was still shut away in his office, and finally headed for the back exit. Daniel dried his hands quickly and removed his apron, curiosity gnawing at him. He couldn't just let it go. Why would she risk her job for a couple of rolls of bread? He followed. The night air hit him as he stepped out into the alley behind the restaurant. Grace was already halfway down the block, her small figure framed by the flickering glow of a broken street lamp. She walked briskly, clutching her purse close to her chest as though guarding treasure. Daniel kept a careful distance, his heart beating faster with every step. He felt conflicted. Half of him still the CEO determined to root out wrongdoing. The other half a man intrigued by the quiet mystery of a woman who seemed too gentle to fit the mold of a thief. Grace turned down a narrower street, past shuttered shops and graffiti, stained walls. The neighborhood grew rougher, the sidewalks cracked, shadows swallowing the corners. Daniel's jaw clenched. This wasn't the kind of place he ever imagined one of his employees going home to. Finally, she stopped in front of a crumbling apartment building, its paint peeling, windows patched with cardboard. She slipped inside quickly, glancing once over her shoulder, and Daniel pressed himself against the wall, unseen. Through the dimly lit hallway, he caught a glimpse of her unlocking a door and stepping inside. A faint light spilled out before the door closed again. Daniel hesitated, torn between leaving and pressing further. His instincts told him that inside that apartment lay the truth about the bread, about Grace, and about why she moved through life with such wary eyes. His curiosity won. He crept closer, leaning near the cracked doorframe just as muffled voices reached him. And then he heard it, the sound of children's laughter. The hallway smelled faintly of damp plaster, and old cooking oil. The kind of scent that clung to buildings long forgotten by landlords. Daniel stood frozen outside the cracked apartment door, the faint light spilling out through the gaps, and listened. Inside, the sound of small feet pattered across the floor, followed by a squeal of joy. "Race, you're home," a little voice cried. Daniel's breath caught. Through the sliver in the door, he watched Grace kneel down, her arms wide open as 2 small children rushed into her embrace. A boy who couldn't have been more than 6, and a girl maybe 8. Their clothes were clean but worn thin, and their hair needed trimming. They clung to Grace as though she were their entire world. "I missed you so much," Grace whispered, kissing their cheeks. "Were you good for Emma?" Another figure appeared. An older girl, perhaps 12. Her eyes already carrying the seriousness of someone who had been forced to grow up too soon. She gave Grace a tired but affectionate smile. "We tried. The heater went out again though. I kept them wrapped in blankets." Grace's smile faltered for the briefest moment before she reached into her purse. "I brought something," she said softly, as though presenting a prize. She unwrapped the napkin and revealed the 2 rolls of bread. The children's eyes widened, their little hands reaching eagerly. "Bread!" the younger boy exclaimed. his voice full of delight as though she had brought home a feast fit for kings. Grace tore the rolls into smaller pieces, dividing them carefully so each child had something. She didn't take a bite herself. Instead, she watched them eat, her face glowing with relief and love. Daniel's chest tightened. He had walked into this night expecting to catch a thief. Instead, he stood outside watching a young woman risk her job, not for greed, not for herself, but to keep 3 children from going to bed hungry. The little boy, crumbs sticking to his cheeks, mumbled through a mouthful. "You're the best, Gracie. You're my hero." Grace's eyes shone with tears. She quickly blinked away. She smoothed his hair back gently. "No, sweetheart. You 3 are my heroes. You're the reason I keep going." Daniel felt something shift deep inside him. He had seen poverty before, in statistics, in reports, in distant charity events. But never like this. Never in the flesh. Where survival came down to 2 leftover bread rolls smuggled out of a restaurant. The apartment itself told its own story. The wallpaper peeled at the edges, the furniture mismatched and worn. A single lamp lit the room, its bulb flickering every so often. Yet, despite the bleakness, there was warmth here, a warmth built from love, sacrifice, and the fragile laughter of children. Grace busied herself making them comfortable. She tucked blankets around the youngest, asked Emma about her schoolwork, and rubbed the boy's small back when he began to yawn. Every action radiated tenderness. It was then Daniel noticed something else. She hadn't eaten all evening. Even now, when her stomach must have been empty after a long shift, she gave everything to them. Her own hunger didn't seem to matter. The weight of what he was witnessing pressed hard on him. Grace wasn't just a waitress earning a paycheck. She was a sister, a provider, a guardian carrying the responsibility of an entire family on her slender shoulders. Daniel stepped back from the door, guilt swirling in his chest. He had thought of her as a possible thief. Now he understood, she was a fighter. And somehow, that truth made him admire her more than anyone he had ever met in the polished boardrooms of his world. As he walked away quietly into the night, his thoughts wouldn't settle. Grace's tired smile, the way she tore bread into tiny pieces, the joy of the children, all of it burned into his mind. He knew he couldn't let this go. Tomorrow, he would confront her, not with anger, but with a question. "How have you carried all of this alone?" What Daniel didn't realize yet was that this single night, standing outside a crumbling apartment, had already begun to change the course of his life forever. The next morning, the restaurant buzzed with its usual rhythm, clattering dishes, sizzling pans, voices calling orders back and forth. But Daniel barely heard any of it. His mind was still trapped in the images from the night before. Grace's tired smile, the children's delighted faces, the way she tore the bread into perfect little pieces, so each of them would have enough. He had watched employees for weeks, but no moment had struck him like that one. Now, standing in the narrow hallway behind the kitchen, Daniel waited. He leaned casually against the wall, still dressed in his undercover uniform, plain white shirt, black slacks, and the same worn apron. He had planned every word in his head, rehearsed a dozen different ways to begin. Still, when Grace finally appeared, balancing a tray of coffee mugs, he felt his resolve twist with nerves. "Grace," he told gently. She turned, startled. "Oh hey," she said, smiling faintly. "Need something?" Daniel hesitated. "Can we talk for a second? In private?" Her brow furrowed slightly. "Is everything okay?" He gave a small nod. "I just want to ask you something. It's not bad. Just, please." She looked uncertain but into a quieter corner near the storage room. She set the tray down carefully, wiping her hands on her apron. "What is it?" Daniel took a breath. "Last night, I saw you leave with some leftover bread." Grace froze. Her face drained of color, and her hands twisted nervously in front of her. I can explain," she stammered. "Please don't report me. I wasn't trying to steal. I'm not here to punish you," they interrupted softly. "I followed you. I saw where you went." Her eyes widened in horror. "You followed me?" He nodded slowly. "I saw your siblings. I saw you give them the bread." Grace's shoulders slumped, and she let out a shaky breath. "Oh God," she whispered. "Please don't tell the manager. I can't lose this job. I swear I've never taken anything else. Just the rolls, only when they were going to throw them out anyway." Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice. I believe you. I'm not angry. I just want to understand. Why didn't you tell anyone you needed help? And tears welled in her eyes, and she blinked rapidly, trying to hold them back. Because no one cares, she said quietly. They just see me as a burden. And I can't afford to be a burden. Her voice cracked, and she looked down. My parents died 2 years ago. Car accident. It was just me and my little sister Emma. And then I found out she was taking care of the twins when I was at school. I dropped out. Got this job. It doesn't pay much, but it's the only thing keeping us afloat. The rent, the food, sometimes it's not enough. So when I saw the bread just going in the trash, I thought maybe it could get us through the night. That's all. Daniel's throat tightened. Grace, you're doing everything by yourself. She nodded, wiping her cheeks with the edge of her sleeve. I tried to apply for assistance, but the paperwork was impossible, and they said I made just enough to not qualify. So I just keep going. One shift at a time. Her hands trembled. I hate that I had to take that bread. I felt like a criminal. But when I saw the twins smiling for a second, I didn't feel like a failure. Daniel's heart ached. You're not a failure. You're the bravest person I've met in a long time. The Grace let out a humorless laugh. Brave. I'm one bad paycheck away from losing everything. I cry in the bathroom sometimes so the kids won't see. But I keep showing up because if I don't, no one else will take care of them. There was a pause, heavy, raw. Then Daniel took a step forward. Grace. I need to tell you something too. My name isn't just Daniel. I'm not a kitchen helper. She looked at him, confused. What do you mean? He exhaled slowly. I'm the CEO of this restaurant chain. I came here undercover to see how this branch was doing. I wanted to understand what my employees go through, what needs fixing. I didn't expect to find you. Grace stared at him in stunned silence. You're the CEO, Les. He gave a small sincere nod. I've watched how hard you work, how kind you are to customers. How you never complain even when others do. And now I know what you've been carrying outside of this job. Her lips parted, but no words came. Shock, fear, and disbelief chased across her face. So what happens now? She whispered. Daniel smiled gently. What happens now is that I help. You shouldn't have to fight this battle alone. I want to make sure you and your family are safe. No more hiding bread. No more feeling like you're invisible. Grace's eyes filled again. I don't want charity. This isn't charity. Daniel said firmly. This is me recognizing someone who deserves better. Someone who's been doing the work of 10 people, with no thanks. I'm going to make sure you get a raise. And I'll personally help you find a better apartment. If you want, I'll help you finish school too. She shook her head slowly, still overwhelmed. Why are you doing this? He looked at her for a long moment. Because last night, I saw someone strong, selfless, and full of love. And it made me realize something. I've been running a company focused on numbers. But people like you are the heart of it. You reminded me of that. Grace wiped at her eyes, trying to compose herself. I don't even know what to say. You don't have to say anything right now. Daniel said softly. Just know that you're not alone anymore. They stood there in silence for a moment. The air between them filled with something new, understanding, and the first spark of something deeper neither of them fully recognized yet. Finally, Grace nodded slowly. Okay, she whispered. Thank you. Daniel smiled gently. You've been carrying the world on your shoulders. Let someone carry part of it for you now. As Grace turned back to her shift, there was still worry in her eyes. But now there was also something else, hope. And for the first time in a long while, Daniel felt like he wasn't just running a company. He was making a difference. The following weeks unfolded like a quiet transformation. Grace still came to work every day, her hair tied back neatly, her uniform pressed. Her tired eyes softened by the same gentle patience Daniel had noticed that very first night. But something had changed. There was less of that constant fear in her expression. The lines of exhaustion were still there. But behind them glowed a small flame of hope, flickering but alive. Daniel made sure of it. The raise had been discreet. He didn't announce it in front of anyone, instead. He asked the HR department to adjust her pay under the explanation of exceptional performance. Grace's hours were also shifted, so she wouldn't always be closing late. He made sure she could be home in the evenings with her siblings. And though she didn't know it yet, her family's rent had mysteriously dropped by nearly a third. Daniel had quietly reached out to the landlord and handled it personally. But beyond the help, what surprised Daniel most was how drawn he felt to her. Not just out of admiration, but something deeper. Every time she smiled at a customer, every time she bent down to comfort a child dining with their family, every time she put kindness above convenience, Daniel's heart tightened. He wasn't just the undercover CEO anymore. He was a man seeing someone remarkable. Someone who had endured hardship yet refused to let it strip her of compassion. He found excuses to be near her, whether washing dishes when she brought in trays or taking breaks just to talk. Their conversations grew warmer. Grace laughed softly at his dry humor, and Daniel learned about the little things she loved. How Emma wanted to be a teacher, how the twins adored drawing superheroes, how Grace herself sometimes sang to them at night when they couldn't sleep. Still, Daniel knew he couldn't keep his secret forever. It weighed on him. The fact that Grace thought he was just another employee scraping by. She deserved the truth. And though part of him feared it would make her see him differently, maybe even resent him, he also knew that real trust couldn't grow on half-truths. One evening as the restaurant closed and the last customer left, Daniel approached her. The air was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant clinking of the dish crew finishing up. "Grace," he said, his voice steady but gentle. "Can I walk you home tonight?" She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Sure. They walked through the cool night, their breath visible in little puffs, the streets mostly empty. Grace clutched her bag close. As always, but this time it wasn't heavy with hidden bread. Instead, she carried an apple and a few cookies she had bought with her own money. A small luxury she could now afford without fear. When they reached the worn steps of her building, Daniel stopped. His heart thudded. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. Grace tilted her head, a faint crease forming between her brows. "What is it?" He drew in a deep breath. "The truth is, I'm not who you think I am. My name is Daniel Harrington. I'm the CEO of Harrington's Bistro." Silence fell. For a moment, the only sound was the wind rattling the loose shutter above them. Grace stared at him, eyes wide, her lips parted in disbelief. "You're the CEO," she whispered. "Yes." He held her gaze, willing her to see his sincerity. "When I came here, it was undercover. I wanted to understand what was happening in this branch. But then I met you. I saw how hard you work, how much you give. Even when you have nothing left. And Grace, that changed everything for me." She blinked rapidly, still processing. "All this time you were watching me. Not watching to judge," he said quickly. "Watching because you stood out. Because you reminded me what this business should really be about. People, not just numbers. And because," his voice softened, "because I care about you. More than I ever expected to." Grace pressed a hand to her chest, her breath trembling. "I don't understand. Why would someone like you, someone with everything, care about me?" Daniel stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "Because you're stronger than anyone I've ever met. Because you love fiercely, even when the world has given you so little in return. Because when you could have become bitter, you chose kindness. And that's the kind of person who humbles me. The kind of person I can't stop thinking about." Her lips quivered, and tears welled in her eyes. "Daniel." He reached out, gently taking her hand. "I don't want to overwhelm you. I know this is a lot. But I promise you, I don't see you as a charity case, or someone who needs saving. I see you as the woman who makes me believe in something more. I've fallen for you, Grace. And if you'll let me, I want to walk beside you. Not above, not rescuing you, but with you." For a long moment, she was silent. The city around them seemed to fade, leaving only the fragile space between them. Finally, she whispered, "I've spent so long being strong for everyone else. I never thought anyone would want to be strong for me." Her tears spilled, but this time they were tears of release, not despair. She squeezed his hand tightly. "If you mean what you say, then maybe I can believe in it too." Daniel smiled softly, relief washing through him. "I mean every word." The door behind her creaked open, and Emma peeked out. "Gracie. Is everything okay?" Grace quickly wiped her cheeks and nodded, smiling faintly. Everything's okay, Em. More than okay. Emma's curious eyes darted to Daniel, then back to her sister. Before she slipped inside again. Grace looked back at Daniel, her expression a mix of wonder and vulnerability. I don't know where this will lead, but I'm willing to see. Daniel's heart swelled. He leaned down, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. That's all I ask. As Grace stepped into her apartment, Daniel turned to leave, but his chest felt lighter than it had in years. He hadn't just discovered dishonesty or laziness in his undercover mission. He had discovered love, resilience, and a reminder of what truly mattered. From that night on, Daniel was no longer just a CEO running a chain of restaurants. He was a man who had found someone worth falling for. Someone whose quiet strength had humbled him. Whose love had already begun to change him. And as for Grace, for the first time in years, she closed the door behind her and felt that tomorrow didn't have to be just another fight for survival. Tomorrow could hold something new. Something beautiful.